Recording. We are back for the preview show. My name is Ian O'Neill and I'm joined today by Harry Powell. This weekend we have a heavyweight showdown in Las Vegas, Nevada in the mighty UFC APEX Center as Sergai Pavlovich and Curtis Blaydes will throw down in the main event of that. Brad Tavares, Bruno Silva is the new co-main event. We've got Song and Ricky Simon got moved to next week. It's hard to keep up, really, to be honest. But we're going to talk about the main event. We're going to talk about the rest of the card. But first, I want to talk to Harry Powell about his thoughts surrounding Max Holloway's performance against Arnold Allen. No takeaways this week. We took a break. We will be back next week with it as yet unnamed review show. This is the preview show and the review show. Maybe that could be the name, eh?
Absolutely.
Harry, how are you doing? First of all, you've been traveling over to Germany to get some work done on your fantastic back piece. Tell people what's been going on.
I'm well now. Thank you. Yeah, I took 4 days, went to Germany, went to Frankfurt, spent a little bit of time out there. Didn't get to see much of the city. It was very much convention, hotel, convention, hotel, convention, hotel. The gentleman that works on my back piece is a gentleman from New Zealand. And obviously that makes it slightly challenging to hop over there and get some work done. And so he travels once a year. And this year he traveled to Germany to do a pretty prestigious convention. And he asked me if I wanted to work when he was out there. And I said, yeah, no problem. And so we did 3 days out there. So that was that as a thing. I obviously missed the fights live. I was almost crying in bed from the pain. Yeah, then I flew back and we are where we are. I apologize to people that we missed the spotlight. I just didn't get a chance. And by the time I was home, it was 9-10 p.m. on a Monday, and I don't want to put stuff out and change the schedules on SevereMMA's side. So spotlight will also be back next week.
We will forgive you. We'll give you 1 week off from your
Thank you. I
hard work,
apologize.
But how many hours now have you spent on your back? It's been quite some time, hasn't it? 60 hours? 60 hours. That's crazy. Yeah. And look, I got a picture of. I'm not going to ask you to expose yourself here on the preview show, but I can say it is fantastic. And I don't know, man. I'm not a big needles guy myself. I don't have any tattoos. Not completely against getting one, but I'm like, I've always struggled about what I'm going to get on. But your one is like, it's awesome, man. I'm really looking forward to it. But look, you said you caught the fights. We're going to take a quick look at the upcoming card, but let's take a step back. Your thoughts on Max Holloway's performance against Arnold Allen. Look, we spoke on the preview show last week, Harry, and the topic of conversation was Max Holloway's status within the featherweight division. Should he move up? Why he's not moving up, etc., etc. Everyone has their own opinions, but I think really what we were talking about was the problem that we have right now. If we thought what was going to happen did happen, and that what we all thought was going to happen is that Max Holloway might have been a little bit too good and get the win over Arnold Allen, and that's just what happened. And we're left in featherweight limbo now, where Alex Volkanovski is in a position similar enough to another few divisions as well within the UFC, where he has taken out some top level competition here for Alex Volkanovski. Your thoughts on that and the fight itself and the performances of those two men before we crack on here?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Spencer sort of laid out some really interesting points on the last preview show about Max slowing down and potentially coming to the other side of the apex of his career. Something that Shawnee has talked about previously is that fighters only have a very limited prime window, and they may have a career spanning 9 to 12 years. Max Holloway was coming into his 11th year or something like that in his MMA career this year. And so what we can expect from Max, our expectations should be lower, right? And equally, just before we carry on, shout out to Spencer. Big things coming from him soon. Love you. Thanks very much. Max's career should be coming to a point where we're gradually or rapidly declining down into where he's going to be looking to end his career, move into retirement, whatever. But what we did say is that Max is a really difficult fight for multiple reasons. One, the stylistic matchup. Two, the whole, we can do the whole analysis thing of why he's a fantastic fighter. But it's also, he's the Caitlin Chukagian now of 145, is you don't really want to put people in there with him because if you're not Alexander Volkanovski level, you're probably going to lose. And we found that out with Yair Rodriguez, who's now got an interim title and is going to go and fight Alexander Volkanovski. And guess what's going to happen there? The likelihood is he's going to lose that fight, right? You now have Arnold Allen, who was riding this fantastic win streak. Whether we can make dubious comments about the people inside the win streak, a win streak of that magnitude in a 145-pound division in the UFC, regardless, is fantastic. Is a fantastic achievement. And so you chuck him in with Max Holloway, and it's like, as we said on the preview show, what happens? If he goes out there and beats Max, and if it looked like it did in the 5th round for the rest of the 4th round, for the rest of the 4 rounds, then you're saying, holy fuck, boys. We've got a serious boy on our hands. Chuck him in there with Volkanovski or whoever it is, whenever that interim title is unified. But it doesn't look like that, right? And equally, if it doesn't look like that, which is what we got on Saturday night, then you're left now with Arnold Allen being like, well, what do I do now? Do I turn around and fight the winner of Song Yadong and what's his name, Ricky Simon, to try and bounce back? Do I wait for a Josh Emmett thing to work itself out? Do I wait for, an Leah Taporia? Like, what do I do now? You know what I mean? Like, I don't really understand what goes from here. And so you've derailed this massive steam train that was building and building and building. And for what? So that Max Holloway can get a win and call out the Korean Zombie. Like, why? I would have been way happier, with just doing the Korean Zombie and Max Holloway and leaving Arnold Allen to pass off into the future.
100%. I think the mistake was made by making that third fight between Max and Alex a little bit too early. And I feel that Max should have went through this process first. The second fight was close and it was contested and everything like that as well. But I feel if you hold off and you put Max in an Arnold Allen style fight then, and maybe another Korean Zombie, and actually go back to making the contenders earn their spot back in there after getting a title shot, whether it was a close fight or not, you know what I mean? But I think that's kind of trying to spanner into the works in the featherweight division. One last thing before we move to the heavyweight fight. And, Spencer was right in what he was saying. I do believe that Max had slowed down a bit and he did not look at his 100% best. But one thing I have to give him credit for, after all the talk and just the Bisping incident, the dude can still take a shot like a motherfucker. Like, he took some bombs from Arnold Allen and he just shook them off as if they were not. And it's amazing through all the fights and all the wars that he's been through, Harry, that his chin is holding up, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's actually worrying, right? And it's worrying because you don't take shots like that unless you learn how to take shots like that. And the only way you learn how to take shots like that is by taking shots like that, right? And you take them really badly to begin with. And then you learn where's okay for you to get hit on the chin and where's not okay for you to get hit on the chin. There's a fella that I follow. He's a boxer, professional boxer. His name's Dave Allen. He's more of an Instagram personality, but he's a legitimate heavyweight boxer, right? Top 15 in the world, whatever he is. And he says, I know where I can and can't get hit. If somebody hits me in the forehead, I take those all night. Nobody in the world is knocking me out. If you catch me clean on the chin, any man puts me away, And that's just the way that it is. And so you learn through arbitrage, through just getting fucking battered, what it's like and how it is to take a shot. Now, there's obviously some ungodly toughness in that man, but that comes at a price, And the thing that worries me is the shots he took in the fight. And equally in the 5th round, you see him and is like, oh boy, this level of pace, this level of pressure. Max of 3 years ago, Arnold Allen comes out in that 5th round, says to Firas Zahabi, World War III, right? And Max says, you're having a fucking laugh, and drowns him. But now, in 2023, Max, what we're seeing is if you have somebody that's willing to go out and throw the kitchen sink at him, you may be able to get to him. And we saw a shade of that in the Yair Rodriguez fight. And now we see it, when have we seen Max wrestle? It's been fucking ages.
Do you know, there was the kind of stat going around before the fight that the last fight that Max Holloway had lost that was a non-title fight was that against Conor McGregor. And it's also the most prominent fight that I remember Max being on his back for a prolonged period of time as well. I don't remember Max being on his back as much. And maybe it was that fight that kind of sparked the thought in him where he worked on his defensive wrestling and keeping the fight on the feet as well. But I mean, we haven't seen that for a long, long time at Max. And look, he is riding these shots well, but I'm afraid that we're going to get a case of the Chuck Liddells here, where one fight it's just not going to be, it's not going to be enough, and he's just going to get hit and he's going to get sparked, and that's how quickly it can happen within the sport as well, really, isn't it?
100%. And if I'm Max Holloway, I think that the Korean Zombie call out is actually a really interesting one and a really telling one. And it's a telling one because we hear John Jones. Spencer and I were talking about this today. I'm giving away as we're recording, as fucking always. But like, Spencer and I were talking about John Jones. And John Jones is saying, oh, the fight in MSG later this year is going to be my last fight. So John comes in, fights Sergai, who, let's be honest, was a pretty nice stylistic matchup for John. And then he's going to fight Stipe Miocic, who's an even easier stylistic matchup for John. And then he's hanging up the gloves. So that tells me for Johnny Bones Jones, I've got a really nice contract at heavyweight. I've spent all this time getting there. I'm comfortable now. I've de-risked the situation as much as possible. And I'm going to de-risk it even further by going and fighting Stipe, who, yes, okay, winningest heavyweight champion of all time. John can ride off into the sunset saying whatever he wants. And now it's de-risking the situation all over the shop. If you're Max Holloway, it feels like to me, when he said, he's the last of my division. He's the last of my division that I haven't fought. That tells you all you need to know, in my opinion, about where Max Holloway is in his career. He takes this Arnold Allen fight. He beats Arnold Allen because he was in his division. But the new era, the newer generation of fighters, Max doesn't give a fuck about fighting those lads. Like, I think Max knows that a fourth fight against Volkanovski doesn't sell. I think Max knows, less than selling, I think he knows he doesn't beat Alexander Volkanovski in a fourth fight. And so he now says, let's do Korean Zombie. That is either the third fight of a massive pay-per-view card, or it's a headliner of a UFC fight night if they're doing a double-header pay-per-view, whatever it is. It's a massive headliner on a paper on a fight night type card. If they manage to get over to Hawaii, if Max is going to say like this is going to be my last one, or maybe they go to Korea for the Korean Zombie, I don't know. But to me, it feels like Max knows what's happening here.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and it'll be interesting to see how long he does stick around for. Like, I mean, there may be an avenue if Alex Volkanovski beats Rodriguez and moves up to lightweight permanently, perhaps. But I would prefer Max to just take this Korean Zombie fight, go off into the sunset, and enjoy the rest of your life. But it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Look, you mentioned John Jones as well, and it's a perfect segue. You know, him not taking too much risk, Max Holloway not wanting to take too much risk. Sergei Pavlovich and Curtis Blaydes, they're going to be taking all the risk on Saturday night. They're heading in there. And look, they have their eyes. There's been a lot of talk about John Jones and this and that from Curtis Blaydes. But the simple fact of the matter is, Harry, with this fight, is John Jones might not be around by the time one of these guys, if we're talking about Curtis Blaydes working his way back into a title shot and Sergei Pavlovich, you know, working his way into his first title shot. We could be talking about the next contender coming in here, and these guys could put themselves in a prime position to fight for a vacant title sometime next year. If we're going off timelines and going off what's going to be happening, they're talking about Stipe and John Jones being in November now in the fall. Very interesting kind of storylines coming into this fight and the situation. But I think Curtis Blaydes finds himself in a situation here where he was with Tom Aspinall, where he's kind of fighting this next up-and-comer in the division. And obviously he didn't get his shine against Tom Aspinall. He got the win. Obviously Aspinall hurt his knee. These things happen. But Sergei Pavlovich is the guy who is causing the most talk in the heavyweight division outside the top of the three. And it's a very interesting stylistic matchup. And would you be looking at it as one of these guys who could be looking at next in line to fight for the title, whenever that may be?
Yeah, like, I mean, it's really tough, actually, because if you're Curtis Blaydes, you've been knocking on that door perennially for your entire UFC career, and now you get there, and every time you've ran into either a Francis Ngannou, these things happen in MMA, or you've managed to fall into an uppercut from Derek Lewis. And again, these things fucking happen in MMA, right? You look at Sergei Pavlovich, and this heavyweight division is screaming out for new blood. And we've been talking about it for God knows how long. We had big high hopes for that other fella, I've forgotten his name, who got whacked the other day in the heavyweight division. He was also a judo guy, did some submission stuff. Can't remember his name. Doesn't matter.
Not Romanov, is it?
Yes, Alexander Romanov. When he came in, we were talking about him being the next guy. We had Tom Aspinall, we have Jalton Almeida, we had Sergei Pavlovich, and we have this rush of an incoming breadth of talent. And then, we're looking at the top of the division where there's the Volkovs, the Rosenstrucks, the Derek Lewises, the whatever. And we're now looking to recycle those guys. And if you're Curtis Blaydes, you're like, well, I've been here the entire time and I haven't fought for a title, right? Like, I haven't been here. I've been here. I've been grinding. I've been beating every fucking person you want me to go and beat. And I can't get a fucking title shot. He's riding at points 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 fight win streak, 5 fight winning streaks, and can't get a title shot. And it feels like last chance saloon for Curtis Blaydes, frankly. If he goes out and loses to Sergei Pavlovich, and if he loses, it's probably by knockout, where does he go from here? Does he just turn into the Neil Magny of the heavyweight division? Does he turn into the Max Holloway of the heavyweight division? I don't know, but I don't know.
It's like with Blaydes, I think, while everybody was kind of half devastated about Francis Ngannou, Francis, as I should say, or Sean will be given out to me. With Francis leaving the UFC, we were all kind of like, oh, fuck, but I can guarantee you that Curtis Blaydes was singing from the rooftops, because I don't think anyone was similar enough to Max Holloway's situation, having been in there with Francis twice before and losing twice before. I don't think anyone would have been paying too much or had any interest in seeing a Francis and Curtis Blaydes number 3. But hit with Francis out of the picture here, there is a new lease of life for Curtis, and he has a stern test in front of him, I tell you, on Saturday night in Sergei Pavlovich, who kind of came into the UFC way back in 2008, lost his first fight against Alistair Overeem, and then picked up 2 wins against Maurice Green and also Marcelo Gollum. 2 knockout wins. That's what he's supposed to do against a fighter of that caliber. COVID came, lots of cancelled fights, kind of came back in. And the first time I remember kind of taking notice properly of Sergei Pavlovich was that win against Shamil Abdurakhimov at UFC London. You were there live that night, weren't you? I want to say. You weren't? No? Okay. All these UFC Londons. I was very impressed with his performance that night. But then he goes out and he knocks out Derek Lewis. And he goes out and knocks out Tai Tuivasa. And it was time to start taking notice here. He has a wrestler test in this fight. And I think, he's got some good power. He is kind of the next big contender to everyone who's talking about Sergei Pavlovich, who's on the come up right now. What do you think of him as a fighter? Do you think he has the ability? Will this define him being at elite level status, or will it define, if he wins, will he be at elite level status in your opinion? Or if he loses, will he have just go down to heavyweight mediocrity like the rest of the guys we've been talking about? What's your opinion on Pavlovich coming in here?
So I don't know is the answer, because in one side, I kind of write off the 2018 loss to Overeem. So on the other side of the world, it's a short notice fight. Your debut against fucking Alistair Overeem, that's a really, really tough ask for any fighter, frankly. And so you go out, you lose, fine, no problem. It did kind of show me that there's a touch of a hole in his ground game, or in his ability to get back up, right? Loses by ground and pound, fine. The Marcelo Go and Maurice Green, those are fights you have to go out, you have to win in the heavyweight division, right? Now, the reason you remember me specifically for UFC London is because that's when we did the watch along for Shami Abdurakhimov.
Ah, that's right.
And we all went fucking bananas because Shami Abdurakhimov is not somebody you just finish. Yeah. That's a guy that takes a shot, does really well in the pocket, and he destroys him in the first round. And so we then go, okay, this is somebody that we take note of. Now, the next 2 wins are great wins, but they're guys that we know are hittable and we know are happy to take a shot. And we know that are happy to stand in the pocket and deliver shots to take a shot. And so I don't know what we learned from that 2 minutes and change or a minute and change performances in both of those fights. And so for me, the Curtis Blaydes fight seems a little like Arnold Allen versus Max Holloway, in that we were coming in and saying Arnold Allen's got this amazing win streak and this massive hype train and steam train behind him, but I'm not quite sure if he is that level yet. Like we talked about Ilia Topuria just a second ago. He's that level. He's that level. I've seen it. I know it. We've seen it. And when he goes in and he fights the Josh Emmett, we're going to see that he's that level too. He may not win that fight because Josh Emmett is a great fighter, but we know he's that level. And for Pavlovich, one thing that I love to see and need to see before I start giving elite level status to people is time, is adversity, is adjustment, is sticking to a game plan. And if there's a man to test that, it's probably somebody like Curtis Blaydes, who's big, who's long, and who will happily find a way to your hips if any situation arises that gives him the credence to do so. And so for Pavlovich, we could see him just go in there and run through Curtis Blaydes, right? Curtis isn't the fastest of fighters, especially with his stand-up. We saw in the first couple of exchanges against Tom Aspinall, he flicks a teep out there, might flick a jab out there, flicks a little bit of footwork out there just to see what his opponent is doing. But Tom certainly looked the faster, more athletic, more dynamic fighter in there. Sergei Pavlovich is a wrecking ball. Like, he will run across the cage. He reminds me a little bit of Brock Lesnar. You know, he's super jacked, lunchbox hands. If he touches you, you might die, but kind of unproven, you know, like big questions around him.
Yeah, I think that's why this is, look, we would criticize some matchmaking, and look, we kind of did last week with the Max Holloway fight. But I think it's safe to say here, Harry, that this is the perfect fight at the perfect time for not one of these fighters, but for both of these fighters, I think, in different regards. For Curtis Blaydes, it's a chance to take out a guy who's been wrecking everybody, who's fought everyone over the last while and knocked them out. A real danger in the division. I don't think there'll be too many people lining up to fight him. And in Curtis Blaydes, if he takes him out, he's like, yeah, I am the next in line. He cements his status here. And if Sergei Pavlovich can kind of come in and beat Curtis Blaydes, well, he announces himself and kind of just takes over that role that Curtis Blaydes have. Like we've talked about maybe stepping in line next for a title shot. That may happen. That may not happen either, depending on, you know, what happens with John Jones and Stipe Miocic, or, you know, maybe we do see Francis come back into the fold as well. But one thing I do know is the winner of this fight is definitely in the conversation. Maybe they might have, depending on how things go, maybe they don't want to sit on the sidelines. It could open up a fight maybe with Tom Aspinall down to kind of define who the true number one contender is. So I'm thinking that's what we're looking at here. What do you think?
Interim title shot will happen after this.
You reckon? Yeah.
Yeah. Because if you're Curtis Blaydes, at least that's my prediction, right? If Curtis Blaydes comes out and beats Sergei Pavlovich, he jumps on the mic and he says, that's the scariest dude in the division, and I just beat him. He may go out and finish him. He may go out and out wrestle him for 5 rounds, whatever it is. But he gets on the mic and he says, that's the scariest dude. I just beat him. I'm next in line. And he can be on the mic and say, if those guys want to wait until November, no stress. Tom Aspinall, when you're ready, come find me. We'll run it again. We could do it in London. Interim title shot. Thanks very much. Because he can say, I've been denied a title shot X amount of times. If my name is next to interim heavyweight champion, there's no denying me. Nobody can take that away from me. I'm not no backup fighter. I'm not this. I'm not that. Bilal Muhammad, you can keep your backup fighter. I'm coming for the title. And so if I need an interim title wrapped around my waist to make that happen, let's make it fucking happen. And we know that the UFC doesn't mind an interim title fight. And as we've said before, whether it devalues the belt or not, it gets fighters paid. And so I am happy to see that. But if it is that we're going to have these negotiations and this, oh, John Jones, is he going to fight? Is he not going to fight? Is Miocic going to take it? Is he not going to take it? The heavyweight division needs to move. And with Aspinall coming back, with Jailton Almeida being in there, with fighters coming through, Mycene Tybura has looked just fine over the last little while. Sergei Spivak as well coming in, and he's seemingly putting things together. This division needs to move on, right? We need to start recycling things and moving things on. And so if we find that Curtis Blaydes goes out, wins against Sergei Pavlovich, he can jump on that mic and say what he wants. If I'm Sergei Pavlovich, however, you go out, destroy Curtis Blaydes, do whatever it is, and you can jump on the mic. And because he has slightly less reverie in the division, slightly less historic value to his name, you might see him say, if one of those fighters drop out, I'm in. But even waiting, what is it, 8 months? Less than that. 6 months? 6 months for a fight? Like, that's a long time. Especially as a heavyweight who's not cutting weight and all that stuff. So, I don't know. I personally think whatever happens, we'll see an interim title shot by the end of the year.
Okay, we'll real quickly take a deep dive into the fight as well. Look at, when I'm matching these two guys up, with Curtis Blaydes, I think coming into this fight, his in-cage experience with elite level fighters is going to pay him dividends, I feel, in this fight. I think he'd be foolish to, you look at, we discussed what we thought he should do ahead of his last fight, and I think we were all kind of surprised that he chose to kind of stand and bang. Not his last fight with Aspinall, the one before that with Chris Dawkins, where we thought he was going to come in and grapple heavy, but he actually chose to stand and bang, and it was a really lovely finish with the right cross and strikes on the ground to get Dawkins out of there. We didn't get to see him too much with Tom Aspinall. You've got to think, though, a guy that hits as hard as Sergei Pavlovich, that Curtis Blaydes will likely be looking to mix it up here a little bit, especially in the early stages of the fight. When we're talking about a guy like Sergei Pavlovich who's knocking guys out in the first round, I think number one priority for Curtis Blaydes here is try and bring him at least to round 2 or round 3 and see what's up. So fight relatively safely early and then see, I have no problem with Curtis Blaydes going out there maybe late round 2, round 3 and striking it up when some of the pop has gone off the punches. But you've got to be thinking that Curtis Blaydes is going to be coming in here and looking to grapple early. It's the smart thing to do. How do you kind of see it matching up? And would you agree with my assessment on Curtis Blaydes? Where I think Sergei Pavlovich, I think the game plan is relatively simple. He needs to stay on the feet and he needs to get off his shots. And if he's successful in doing that, I'm not too sure if there's too many people that can take those shots in the heavyweight division right now. But it's a fascinating kind of stylistic matchup in that kind of regard.
So I think the thing that impressed me the most, I'll start with Sergei Pavlovich because he's the easiest to break down. I think the thing that impressed me the most about Pavlovich's finishes over Derek Lewis and Taito Avasa is how when he hurts his man, he doesn't do what you see a ton of old heavyweights do, which is just swarm them. Just swarm them, throw anything and everything at somebody until they might fall over.
Shane Carwin versus Brock Lesnar.
Exactly, right? Whereas Taito Avasa, he picks his shot, he takes a back step, he changes his angle, he lands a nice shot, Tai starts to cover up, he changes his angle again, he lands another shot. He's in the moment, very, very, very precisely and decisively picking his shots and landing them for the exact reason of he knows where the hole is and he's going to land it. That is a stark contrast to how he gets to those shots because he's very explosive, wants to get into the pocket, wants to land his strikes. I think that game plan against Curtis Blaydes is a silly one. What you want to do against Curtis Blaydes is push Curtis Blaydes back with pressure. And then when he's against the cage, you know that he's going to have two options. Similar to Isla Adesanya versus Alex Pereira, he's either going to explode into a takedown or into a grappling situation, or he's going to explode out with a jab or a teep or a front kick or whatever. So if I'm Pavlovich, I'm going to be cutting off the cage against Curtis Blaydes. I'm going to be making sure that my stance is a little lower on my hands or a touch lower too. So I'm ready to down block and I'm ready to be in a position where I can look for underhooks or I can look for overhooks and negate the immediate takedown defense. Immediate takedown offense, sorry. I want to negate that because Curtis Blaydes is somebody that has a great power double and is happy to wrestle in the middle of open space, which is not something we see very often in lower weights, especially not at higher weights, right? I think if you're Curtis Blaydes, the answer is pretty simple, to be honest. You know Sergei Pavlovich is a one-round fighter. We kind of know that, right? And so what we do is we let him walk across the cage And when he flies into a big right hand or a big jab, we just level change, we get to his hips and we take him down. And if he manages to get back up, we're not going to expend a ton of energy keeping him there. We're going to let him back up. And as soon as he's halfway up, as soon as he's on a post, we're going to strip the post. As soon as he gets back up to a hand or he gets back up to a knee, we're going to strip him back down again. We're going to ride him. We're going to make him feel the weight. If he gets all the way back up to the cage, we're just going to lay on him. And we're going to keep him heavy. We're going to fill those arms with lactic acid. And then we can see what's happening in the second. Then we can see what's happening in the third. I think reactive takedowns here for Curtis Blaydes are going to work really, really well. Timing, if it gets into a striking exchange where it's a slightly longer range than Pavlovich usually likes to fight at, and we can see some of those teeps, we can see a little bit of that jab, we can see maybe a right hand, we can set those up and everything finishes with the threat of a takedown. Not necessarily a full shot, but we level change. We drop a hand, we feint at the floor, we look down. We're giving the threat of the takedown at every single opportunity because we know Pavlovich can't be on his back because it doesn't matter who you are, unless maybe Jailton Almeida. But if Curtis Blaydes is on top of you, his ground and pound is ferocious. And so that's the thing. If I'm Sergei Pavlovich, is I'm trying to negate with the utmost ferocity. And if I'm Curtis Blaydes, I'm using my experience. I'm letting this guy come to me. And if he wants to overextend on his shots, no problem. I'll be on his hips in a flash.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. I'm excited to see what happens there. Look at, it's always going to be like fun in the heavyweight division at this level anyway, at the very least. Look, we've given out time and time again about the mid-card mediocrity of heavyweight fights, but this one definitely ticks off a few boxes. Obviously, we've lost the co-main event that's been rescheduled to next week's. Is it next week's show? Or yeah, I think it was supposed to be Saryukin and the Saryukin fight that's been pulled, but now Song Yadong and Ricky Simon will be moved to next week, we think. Don't take our word on it, but Brad Tavares, Bruno Silva steps in as the co-main event, Harry. And I mean, look at technically Jeopardy, you know, it might not have this might not have it, but it does have a little bit of entertainment factor. We're talking about Bruno Silva who's come in here. He's knocked 19 of his opponents out. Brad Tavares is also known for a few knockouts himself, but more so likes to kind of coast and win decisions. And, you know, it's kind of hard to assess what's going to happen in this fight because, you know, with Brad Tavares and with Bruno Silva, we don't really know where they're at mentally with their careers and both kind of, you know, Brad Tavares is at 35 years of age. He's been around a long time now. Bruno Silva is 33, a little bit younger in his career, maybe a little bit more purpose to fight for. But, you know, quick assessment on this fight and what you think of it.
Brad Tavares should storm this, like he goes out and loses close enough, competitive enough fight against Dricus du Plessis. Dricus du Plessis is now in the conversation for title shots and this and that and the next thing. He goes out, beats Amari Akhmedov in a split decision, goes out, destroys Carlos Antonio Jr., goes out, loses to Edmund Shabazi, and these things happen in MMA. But Brad Tavares is like, he's a fan favorite for me just because he's one of those guys that can do everything. You're never going to see him banging on the door for a title shot. You're never going to see anything ultra flashy, but his range management is good. He hits hard. He has a good variety of kicks. He keeps his hands up for the most part. His head moves well. His footwork's okay. His negative wrestling is fine. His positive wrestling is fine. Bruno Silva gets taken to a decision by Alex Pereira, which on his record now looks absolutely fantastic. Like,
yeah, 100%.
But this is the Bruno Silva that was the black belt that didn't shoot a single takedown against Alex Pereira. Like, what are we doing here? Like, and then goes out against Gerald Meerschaert and loses by guillotine. Again, these things happen sometimes in MMA. And so if I'm Brad Tavares, I'm going out there and I'm just going to put it on him. You just touch him. Like, Brad Tavares to me is like Alex Morono. One of those fighters who you think is great, you think is a bit average, goes out, you put it in front of him and you're like, bloody hell, this guy's actually good, you know? He can take a shot, he can give a shot, he moves well. Brad Tavares, for me, should take this fight relatively simply. But then again, we know Bruno Silva has power. We know he can crack. We know he can do some of the striking. And as you say, Brad Tavares is 348 years old. So
yeah, well, Brad Tavares can also still take a hell of a shot as well. So it'd be very impressive if Silva did manage to do that. Look at the way you described Brad Tavares. You could kind of similarly describe their next fighter as well, and that's Bobby Green, who steps in to take on Jared Gordon. Maybe just a little tidbit about this fight. It looks like the UFC have rewarded Jared Gordon with this fight after his loss to Paddy Pimblett, and that's something it was a contested decision, but I'm glad the UFC put Jared Gordon in this kind of style of a matchup with a name, a guy who's fairly prominent in the lightweight division too, and it makes for an interesting stylistic matchup. But I think the way I described, I can't remember what fight it was last week, but I feel that Bobby Green they have similar enough style, but Bobby Green is just a little bit more polished in where I think he's going to be able to fend off the takedowns of Jared Gordon. And I think he's a little bit tighter and neater on the feet. He's got a good jab, can move around the octagon quite well. Do you think Jared Gordon is has a new lease of life after a loss to Paddy Pimblett, but he's getting a lot of shine on him now. His personality is shown. He has a fantastic story. Does Jared Gordon, a former drug addict who was homeless and almost died in a past life, has turned things around and is fighting up here against Bobby Green. And it's an interesting style matchup. I'm wondering how you feel it goes down.
So I just want to start by saying that I actually would have liked to see this as the co-main event. We've talked on the takeaways and equally on the preview show when we have a bit of a natter about the card placement. Is these fight night shows, the main and the co-main, are really, really useful spots for fighters, and they can be used for a variety of different things. I feel like a co-main event slot on a fight night serves a couple of bits of purpose. One, it's a fight with a bit of jeopardy, or it's a fight that you want to really, really shine a spotlight on a couple of fighters, or it fits the purpose of when you have a veteran fight with a veteran fighter, like Bobby Green, and then you have somebody like Jared Gordon, who, as you have said, is, whether through a loss or not, has garnered way more attention, having shared the octagon with Paddy Pimblett. This is the kind of place you put them, right? Like, yeah, okay, there's maybe a couple of other fights that you could say has a touch more divisional jeopardy here, but there's not many, right? And so why not chuck Bobby Green and Jared Gordon into the co-main event slot? Have them have that little bit more shine, that little bit more media attention. Bobby Green equally has a great story. Jared Gordon, as you've already alluded to, fantastic story. And so I don't know. I'll move on anyway. But
no, it's a valid point. We've had this conversation time and time again on a lot of the shows that we've had, and I feel that it's very important that the co-main event and the main event of these cards are respected as they should be, because I always viewed co-main events and main events as prominent spots in cards. And like you said, stuff that you can kind of develop narratives, develop storylines, and develop other fights from as well. So there's a valid point. Talk to me about the ins and outs of this fight. I'm looking at this fight and I'm fancying Bobby Green, if I'm being honest. I think he's going to be able to dictate the pace of the fight. I think he's going to be able to dictate where the fight goes. And I think without being able to kind of impose his will on fights, and we've seen that against Paddy Pimblett, he was in certain regards able to impose his will on that fight. I think if he comes in here and he has the inability to do it, he's probably going to get picked apart on the feet here.
So you look at his last two losses. Drew Dober, these things happen in MMA. Islam Makhachev, these things absolutely 110 million% happen in MMA. You cannot take anything away from Bobby Green for losing to Islam Makhachev or Drew Dober. And yet you look at Nasrat Haqparast, who's kind of the same fighter to Jared Gordon, if we're honest, right? Pretty stand-up fighter, regular stance, regular width of stance, regular boxing style. Jared Gordon could do a bit of the grappling, fine. Neither are super quick, neither hit really hard, neither are super athletic. Both of them have really solid fundamental boxing. Bobby Green picked apart Nasrat Haqparast. And it feels, and this is MMA maths, and I should never, ever, ever, ever talk about this, But Bobby Green has such a gorgeous style to watch and such a difficult style to try to fight. He switches stances constantly. His chin's always out, but his head movement is fantastic for the most part. His hips move so well. His footwork is great, and his hands are always by his fucking sides. It's so hard to know what shot's coming, where it's coming from, what angle it's coming from, whether it's going to be a misdirected shot, whether it's going to be a straight jab, where it's coming from, you've no idea. And he talks to you constantly. He's always chatting shit. He's always in your face. He could do a bit of the wrestling. He can scramble. Like, he is a really difficult stylistic matchup for most fighters. And you said that you feel like Jared Gordon's been rewarded here. I actually disagree. Like, I would be wondering, let me just
I'll
hear
finish.
me out.
I'll finish. I'll hear you out.
What happens if Bobby Green beats Jared Gordon here, jumps on the mic and says, I'd like a trip to London? Paddy Pimblett, what are you saying?
Well, I think that's a valid point for both of these fighters. This could be the Paddy Pimblett stakes that both of these guys are fighting in. And yeah, I guess you're back to square one. What I mean about being rewarded is that Jared Gordon could have been put in there with a young, hot up-and-comer in the lightweight division, and he might have got sparked by him. I mean, what he is, to me, and that fight would have meant nothing to a lot of people. I think that him being in there with Bobby Green, the name that Bobby Green has, and the personality that Bobby Green has as well, I think that, maybe for lack of a better term, that is a somewhat of a reward. And this fight does mean a little bit more than going in there against one of these younger guys who could just blow him out of the water. And then look where he's at. You lose to Bobby Green. People lose to Bobby Green sometimes, but it's a good kind of a litmus test to see for him to bounce back on. I'm very excited to see this fight and see how it matches up. Like you said, I always enjoy watching Bobby Green fight. He's just a real quirky personality, has a kind of a loosey-goosey style on the feet. I mean, when it works brilliantly, and when it doesn't work, it fails terribly. So it's that's all that has to be said about Bobby Green. We'll shoot our way down the rest of the card. We'll cover it real quickly. Eastman Lucindo versus Brogan Walker in the 125-pound division. I mean, not too much to say about that fight. With Eastman coming in for her second UFC fight. She lost to Usman Yaragay in her last fight. Brogan Walker is coming in there, record of 7-3. She was defeated against Juliana Miller in her last fight. So that tells me, Juliana Miller didn't really shine herself in a great light in her last fight. So I'd be looking at Lucindo there if we're looking to bet on it, and kind of bringing in a few old habits from the picks and plays here. Jeremiah Wells versus Matt Smelsberger will open up the card in the 170-pound division. You think these two boys are going to go at it? Dana White kind of alluded to the fact that, he's wanting to put these kind of banging fights at the start of the main cards to draw people's attention in. Do you expect that these two lads are going to deliver?
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I mean, the way that Jeremiah Wells destroyed Court McGee with that left hook was unbelievable. And Matt Semmelsberger, like, he used to be called Semi, right? Because he's the size of a semi truck, and now he's Semi the Jedi, so he's ruined his own name. But he is a fella who is just a freak athlete, can take a shot, can land a shot, and is absolutely ginormous for the division. Neither of these boys hang about. They both go in, they both push the pace, they both look for finishes, they both look to land damage. So yeah, I imagine it's going to be a banger for sure.
I can't believe Ricky Glenn is still fighting. He's a guy who's coming in here and he's facing Christos Giagos in a lightweight fight. Obviously, Ricky Glenn's been around since the very early stages, since I was watching the UFC. Maybe when is he? Well, or maybe I'm getting mixed up with somebody else. Am I? No, 2016. He's been around a while. But not too much to write home about against Christian Giagos. We're not going to spend too much time on that fight. Let's talk about Ronnie Yahya versus Montel Jackson. You feel if Ronnie Yahya cannot implement his grappling in this fight, he's going to be in for a tough night here, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, the Ray Rodriguez finish was nice. The Kyo Young Yang performance was nice. It's a shame he didn't get the Cody Garbrandt fight. I think that would have been a great fight for him. Montel Jackson, I don't know. It does feel like they've set this up for Montel Jackson to go and get a win over Rani Yahya. But Rani Yahya is a bit of a legend. We know what we're getting with him. It's mad scrambles, it's finishes, it's guard passing, it's all that stuff. So yeah, I'm excited for the fight, but I do feel like they've kind of built this for Montel Jackson to get a bit of a name over Rani Yahya.
Similar enough to what they were trying to do and throwing Cody Garbrandt in there with Rani Yahya as well, I feel. But look, he escaped the bullet that time. I don't know whether he'll do it against Montel. It'll be interesting to see. Basically, Harry, any fight that I see at the women's 145-pound division now is a number one contenders fight. And Carol Rosa and Norma Dumont are going to throw down on the prelims here. And because the division is so sparse, that's why I call it. And there might be another one on next week, and I'll call that a number one contender fight as well, just because we just don't have any clarity on what's going on in the division or what's happening. This is a battle of Brazil. I mean, I think it's a good move. I'm happy to see Norma Dumont fighting at 145. I think it suits her much better than fighting at 135. I mean, there's not too much to talk about this because we don't have any meaning within the 45-pound division in the women's class right now. And it's kind of fair to say that too, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if we just forget that and look at the fight as a fight, like Carol Rosa is the better fighter here. Norma Dumont is a solid fighter, but if you go back and watch her performance against Danielle Wolf should have won that fight, but just gassed. And in that first round looked fine, landing loads of shots, and then gassed, and Norma Dumont came back and won a decision, I think, if my memory serves me correctly. But Carol Rosa can actually do the fighting, right? And so if we're looking at a number one contenders and Carol Rosa goes out there, she should beat Norma Dumont and gets on the mic and says, sure, look, I'm the number one contender with a single win in this division. Let's go, run me up that title, you know?
Put me in as the backup fighter for Juliana Pena, and let's run this bitch at 145 if Pena pulls out. So look, I don't know. Maybe she probably won't do that, and I'm probably dreaming, but I don't want that to happen anyway. But we shall move on to the heavyweight division. Muhammad Usman and Junior Tafe. Big, meaty men throwing meat here, Harry, in the heavyweight division. Look at Usman is going to want to come back from that loss, and I think he came back quite well against Zach Pauga. Usman was, that one wasn't counted because it was in the Ultimate Fighter, really. It's only listed as an exhibition here, but yeah, he was winning that fight until he was losing it. No, he was losing against Zach Pauga before he came back and landed that hook. I'm getting so confused in this mediocrity of this division. He's coming in against Junior Tafe undefeated. The same thing could happen here. Anyone could go down at any moment in this fight.
I don't know. We don't know anything about Junior Tafe, right? Like, yes, he's had 4 wins. We know the camp he's from. We know he hits hard. We know that the name that he comes from, right? The Tafe brothers. But Muhammad Usman's not a very good fighter, right? He's got massive power, and he's in the UFC or was in the Ultimate Fighter because of the name that he carries, right? But this is not a high-level fight. Junior Tafe, for me, has more upside than Muhammad Usman has. I think we've sort of seen where Muhammad Usman is. Maybe he can come in and surprise us, and if he does, fantastic, fair play to him. But this isn't a super high-level fight. Yeah, I think that's it, really.
That's it, yeah. We've probably talked about that more than we should have. Last but not least, there's a couple of fights on it. Priscilla Cachoeira faces off Catherine Silva at 125. Bakary Dana, like him, he's the Mongolian murderer, has heavy power. He faces Brady Highstand in the opening fight. But the fight I want to kind of last but not least focus upon is that of Francis Fire Marshall, and I love his nickname, against William Gomis, a guy that we have been familiar and seen fight before on the European scene. And I'm very excited to see how Francis Marshall copes with someone like William Gomis, because when Gomis is on, he's a motherfucker to fight.
Look, William Gomis took a 1-fight deal with Cage Warriors in 2021. I was there for that fight, and he comes out in his leopard print shorts with his team, and then Tobias Harila walks out. If you haven't seen a Tobias Harila walkout, go and have a look on Fight Pass at any of his walkouts. It is a sight to behold. It's one of the things that's joyous about European MMA or MMA outside of the big promotions, where these guys have a little bit more freedom to dictate how their walkout goes. And I won't give anything away, but just go and watch the walkout. It's a fantastic walkout. It's a real fan favorite, a real crowd favorite. And everyone thought this William Gomis fella is going to come in and Tobias is going to run him over and we're off to the races. But yet again, Ian Dean of Cage Warriors pulls together this fighter that nobody yet had heard from on the European scene. And Harila did what he did, which is he walks down fighters, looks to land big power shots, keeps his hand close to his chin, throws loads of jabs, throws teeps, whatever it is. And Gomis's footwork on the back foot was incredible. He danced around Tobias Harila for 3 rounds, picked him off at absolute will, and it was just a gorgeous performance. After that, he goes out, puts another 3 wins together, then gets in on the France card, beats Jarno Aarons. Sorry, Mr. Aarons, I apologize. And so here, Francis Marshall is another good test, undefeated fighter. Really, really nice performance last time out. But I just have a feeling that William Gomis is something very interesting in this division. Not somebody that I'm looking at to, be a top 10, top 5 fighter, but a really interesting addition to this division. And I really like his style. He really impressed me with that Tobias Harila performance. And so I'm absolutely signing up anytime he fights.
100%. If you're going to tune in for a fight early in the card, this is it for me. It's Marshall versus Gomis. I think even Harry in that in his UFC debut, while he was decent in that fight, was Gomis. I don't think we saw a flash of how good he can be, and I'm hoping that we get to see it here. Look at Francis Marshall comes in, and he's going to want to move forward and land his punches as well. I'm interested to see how Gomis does on the back foot here. I think kind of this is a stylistic matchup that will kind of bring what he offers in his fights to the table a lot more than what maybe that we've seen in his UFC debut.
I agree. And look, at the end of the day, first UFC card in Paris, you're out there. I think there was some decisions as to whether he was even going to make that card, whether he was going to get a fight on that card. He does get a fight on that card. He's fighting in Paris in front of his home crowd. The nerves must have been insane. We also, as always, you can't take too much from a fighter's first UFC performance. The jitters are real, everything else. Let's see what happens in this one, because the stylistic matchup, as you mentioned, is a forward fighter versus a fighter who can show and display fantastic variety of skills on his back feet. And so let's see what happens for Gomis here. Can he put in a performance? I hope so. But equally, if Francis Marshall goes in there and shows Gomis the door, well, that's a big win. People may not know, but Gomis is a very, very good fighter. And if Francis Marshall goes in and puts a similar performance together on his own UFC debut, we've got a fighter on our hands in Francis Marshall. I love the matchmaking here.
Yep, as do I. And we will see what is going to go down on Saturday night. Obviously, Sergai Pavlovich, Curtis Blaydes are taking the shine in the main event, but we've got an all right card that we'll get through and discuss next week. Harry and I will be back to break it all down on a as yet unnamed show. Maybe the balance breakdown. We'll see. The discussions and negotiations are happening. But you can follow Harry Powell at BJJ_Harry Powell. Check out his Severe Spotlight that will be back this Monday. Check out the lads on the main podcast. Sign up to the SevereMMA Patreon. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button. Share our content. We do appreciate your love and support. We look forward to hearing from you. We'll talk to you next week. And we'll be back with a full review of this card featuring Sergai Pavlovich and Curtis Blaydes. Goodbye. Good luck.